everybody. We're here with Cancer Smiles and Sarcasm. And Heather was in a different episode, but here today, Heather is here as herself, not in the cancer perspective, not as a caregiver, not as anything, just Heather, because Heather is an amazing individual and she deserves a special episode. So, why is Heather amazing? I just want to say Heather holds a special place in my heart as just a truly wonderful lady. I met her years ago and she was playing poker and found out at that time she was also an artist who made pottery. And I just want to give our listeners a visual of Heather. She has burn scars all over her body. Her fingers are not normal. And it was amazing to me when I met her that she could hold her poker cards, let alone shuffle and deal. And then I imagined her as an artist, and I've seen her art since, and I've bought tons of it. Well, maybe not as much as Heather would like, but she makes beautiful plates, bowls, mugs. You would never know of her physical impairments. She's also a full time. And I have always just been astonished by Heather. I think just because and I hate to say this, but you see her and you go, that takes balls, right? To do everything that you've done and to, and I didn't know your story before, but to whatever you went through to overcome it first and foremost, and then to just live in this world, this hard world that we live in, and to live it with a smile and to approach it and to go out in public. And I think some people might not be doing that, right? And so, welcome, Heather. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks. Geez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you're talking about you might write a book or something.
I am.
And
Yeah. I've been working on it for a while. Sometimes it's just hard to, sometimes I just hit dead ends is all.
and you want to give us just a little glimpse of what is that book going to be about?
Well, it's just my story, where, and it's mostly being burned. I was in a car accident when I was 16 years old. My boyfriend was with me and he died in the wreck. And, just that journey of living through that and then, coming out on the other side and, deciding what I was going to do with my life, where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And so, it's just basically my story.
Yeah, a big story it is too. So 16 years old, you're in a car accident and your boyfriend dies. Wow, how long had you been dating him?
About a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was the accident his fault? You tell the listeners about the accident kind of.
Yeah. He had a 1960 Chevy. So it was like an older truck with the gas cap that kind of comes out right beside the door, the driver's side door. And we were stopped at a stoplight and we started to go forward and there was a curve, just a natural curve in the road as we approached. So it was kind of a freak sort of an accident. I remember it very clearly. And we proceeded forward and then all of a sudden it kind of went right and then left really quickly and the truck tipped over onto the driver's side and skid along the road. And so the gas cap got sheared off as we were skidding along the road, and that caused the sparks and it went into the tank. And it was pretty quickly then that the flames were coming in the door. And I remember him, reacting to the flames coming in the door. And it was kind of ironic too, at that stoplight, just before we had went through the stoplight, I rolled down my window. And had I not rolled down that window, he wouldn't have been able to push me out. And so when we wrecked and the flames came in the door, he pushed me out the window. And there happened to be a highway patrolman that was eating at a restaurant right there. Highway patrolman came over, grabbed me by the arm and pulled me off to the side.
Wow. Wow. So some just, oh my God, ironic moments, some things that you were meant to be, right? You were meant to be here with us today.
Yeah.
Wow. So unfortunately, then your boyfriend died.
He did. Yep.
Yeah. And you were there that whole time.
Yeah.
As a 16-year-old. Wow.
Yeah. So then they took me to the local hospital here and then they airlifted me from here in Grand Junction to Denver. And I remember being in the emergency room, and I remember some nurse asking if they were going to admit me upstairs because they have a little burn unit here at St. Mary's. And I remember the reaction being like, no, you know, and then they said I was going to go for a little ride, one of the nurses. And that's kind of when I blacked out and I didn't remember. So the accident happened on April 7th. And so I, remember bits and pieces of being in the emergency room. And then I don't remember getting on the flight for life, but I do. But then the next I had lots of memories in between, but I can't exactly tell you what date it was and where it was on the timeline. But then I do remember a very good friend of mine, still to this day, but a nurse of mine over in Denver walking in and saying, "Heather, it's the 1st of July and it's just me and you."
Oh,
And I was like, oh, dang. So I went from April 7th to the 1st of July, not really being in a weird state.
wow. Wow. So, and it was just you and her. So, well, what did that look like? You woke up and there was nobody else there besides a nurse.
It was just a weekend that she was working. And so, she just came in the room and was, checking my IVs and doing what normally she would do coming on shift. And that's just what she had said.
And was your family there? Like, were they able to be there pretty quick? You
They
woke up?
came back and forth. My dad got on a plane and kind of flew behind me on the flight for life. But, he had to go to the regular airport. And then my mom left a few hours later and drove over the day that it
Mhm.
happened. And then they had to be back and forth for, work and my little sister. And, there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
So they weren't there
Okay.
all the time, but they came, in and out.
And when did you find out that your boyfriend had died?
I knew immediately. Yeah, I remember telling the EMTs and the people on the scene that, Travis was still in the truck. You gotta, get Travis out. But I knew. I just knew.
Mm, yeah, it's a bummer. Well, all right. So now you are this successful lady. You're an artist, and so tell us more. How did you overcome that? So you're 16 years old. I mean, eventually you went. Did you go back to school? What did
I
life look
did.
like?
Yeah,
Teenager.
yeah, I did. I went back and graduated high school pretty much on time. And then, I was still back and forth between because I went to the Shriners Hospital in Cincinnati. And so I went back and forth and was having different reconstructive surgeries, different things for several years after the fact. I got released from the hospital just days before my 17th birthday. And so I spent several years in and out of the hospital just having reconstructive surgery. And I finally just kind of tapped out, because it hurts and it was a lot of process. And I just, I got to a point where I was, I had full range of motion and I was done. I was just done having surgery. So
Mhm.
I was then done at Shriners and I was, in my early 20s, 23, I guess. And then I decided, I just sat for a few months, and I was like, what am I going to do? Because that seemed to be the focus of a lot of what I was doing. And then I decided to go to school. And I've always liked art. It was the class that I always ended up going to when I was in high school. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just go to the college and take some art classes. And then that turned into a whole Bachelor of Fine Art after I, went for a while and graduated in '08 from college. But yeah, I just decided that I needed to do something. I wasn't just going to sit around.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you're an intelligent person, and the burns didn't impact your brain, right? But I'm sure it impacted your mental health and how you showed up in the world. Correct?
Yeah, I think so. But I guess I felt like I had like I survived for some reason. I may never know all of the reasons. I think that there's probably several reasons why I fought and lived. And so I, for very early on, felt like if I was going to live, then I was going to live.
Right.
I'm not going to just hide out or not live this life.
And I mean, besides the surgeries, I mean, was it just painful for the just having those burns? Like, how long did those burns hurt?
Years, years.
Y-
And I wore garments, so that like keeps they're called pressure garments. And so for several years I wore those because it helps with the scarring so that the scarring doesn't raise up and get hard. It keeps it kind of soft and flat. And anybody that's been burned third degree, I was burned 94% third degree. So essentially my whole entire body. And then where I wasn't burned, they took grafts from. So I was in head to toe garments for years.
Wow. And what did it look like then for you to show up? Like, you go into high school, when you start back up. I mean, what are the kids? And let me just preface this. We live in a small community, right? So you're in a small community, anyways. But what did that look like for you? I mean, show
Well,
back up at school.
sure. Yeah, no, that was tough. I did not go back through the doors of Grand Junction High School. Graduated from R5, which is an alternative high school, and it was a way smaller student body. I definitely had my close friends, and they sort of insulated me. Like I had them, and they were real protective of me. And so I think that was certainly something that helped me get back out there. They, were my friends beforehand and then just stayed my friends after. They're still my friends today. But
Nice.
yeah, but I think that, you know, I couldn't I just couldn't walk back through the doors. That was a little too much. At
Okay.
16, 17 years old, that was tough. I did go to my 30th year, like Grand Junction High School reunion. So after 30 years, I was able to go ahead and go hang out with those people again. But I grew up here, so some of those people I went to kindergarten with. So
And did they look at you
elementary.
differently at that time?
Yeah, at like in high school or
Oh,
years
after
later.
30 years. After 30
Oh,
years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know. I think that when you're a teenager, you're kind of 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And so when you have a peer that proves that that's not exactly true, like you could, anything could happen to anybody at any time. I think that, you know, perhaps they reflect on their own egos and their own things. But after 30 years, we're different people, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at
Well,
the
I like that.
time in high school, it was different for sure.
I like your perspective because you're not talking about you. You're talking about, hey, shit, I'm walking proud. And now they're looking at themselves, like, wow, this could have happened to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been my experience. I think that a lot of times people's reaction to me isn't about me at all.
And why do you think that?
Well, I think that they then, like I said, that like their egos or they reflect on what it would be like for them.
Mm,
The people don't ask, I mean, sometimes people ask me questions, but I think that in large part, people tend to reflect on what that would be like for them. How would they approach life? How would they be able to handle walking through life? And, that's none of my business, like but they don't, they don't tend to want to know. Well, some people want to know me better, but I think a lot of times people's initial reaction is really about themselves.
mm. And how did you get to that space? Because that's not what everyone could walk through life, after what you've been through and, and the obvious scars that you have on your body. That's not how everyone could approach life, right? They could be afraid to go out in public and they would go, oh my God, every time I go out, Everyone's staring at me and I feel so bad. Poor, poor, pitiful me. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to do anything. So, how did you get to the space of this positive outlook and kind of redirecting and transferring that over?
That's a really good question. I I don't know. I mean, I think that, there was, at first having people, well, I wear around my worst day. Like there's no, I think everybody deals with lots of stuff in their life that they don't show everybody every day. I share my worst day with complete strangers every day. They may not know details, but they see, my worst day.
Mhm.
And I remember, when people staring at me at the beginning and not knowing how to react. I mean, do I smile at them? Do I get mad? Do I say something? Do I ignore it? And I did all of those things, like and I think that it's, it all just comes down to the different, kids, they're just curious. Adults, they might have their personal opinions attached to things. I don't know. I mean, like, again, that's a really good question. I don't know how I overcame it with the being positive, other than, I did want to just live my life. I felt like I was given this, not given, I feel like I fought for it to live and to be here, but I wasn't going to waste it. Like what good of what is it to do all of that and survive all of that if I wasn't going to enjoy what I had done, or what, like with the work, of course, of surgeons and medical teams. But
Yeah.
I guess that
So
was
it sounds like
always my
maybe you were
attitude.
already sorry, it sounds like maybe you
Yeah.
already had a good mental head on your shoulders
Yeah,
before
I
this even
guess
happened.
I guess so.
Yeah. And I mean, one part that you said was that you had, friends, a group of friends that shielded you from some maybe unfortunate things that could have happened to you had those friends not been there and you weren't alone.
Yes.
And how about your family? Like, what kind of family support did you have throughout this? And what kind of, I mean, I guess just in general, because like, why did it's just amazing to me, right? Because we just hear so many people and just in this poor, poor, pitiful me, right? And can't overcome things. Like, what did you grow up like? Why did you approach it like this?
I don't know, because to be quite frank, at the time of my, when I got burned in my accident, my family was a complete shit show. My parents had just gotten divorced. They were with new people, and those people, like they were in constant conflict. Like, well, this is a good example. When I was, obvious, I was going to survive. It'd be, like, because it was kind of touch and go for many months. They'd call my parents and be like, "Ooh, she's not doing well. This, like, we've got a new infection coming on. This is bad. She's not doing well. She's probably going to die." And so they would come over there. Well, after that point, which was around, the 1st of July, it was clear that I had made it through and that I was going to live. And I remember it, the decision was made that the best option for me would be to go to a Shriners Hospital. So there's one in Galveston, Texas, and there's one in Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, my dad and his wife were like, "Well, we'll go to Galveston." And I knew that my dad wasn't going to be able to take care of me. I mean, there's a lot involved here. And then my mom was like, "Well, I'll go to Cincinnati," because her husband was a professor, so he could just get a job, and he ended up getting a job at Indiana State. Well, then it was left up to me to decide who was going to be my caregiver. What was
Oh,
my best option? Was, should I go to Cincinnati? Should I go to Galveston, Texas? And so, as a 16-year-old that has barely survived this, like
wow.
the roles had almost reversed. Like
Yeah.
I was the adult in the room and they were not.
And they gave you the decision or the doctors did?
They did. They were like,
What?
like, what do you think's best? You know? And so it was a complete, yeah, it was nuts, honestly. I mean, at the moment, I remember thinking logically, like, well, my dad's not going to be a good caregiver. This is not his situation. This is not going to work. And so I was like, well, I think my mom's more capable of helping me with like baths and garments and, like the situation that I was in and being there when I was having surgeries and different stuff. And so I chose Cincinnati.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, like as I look back, I'm like, what? Like what on who, what? Anyway,
Well, it sounds maybe at that time you had already been kind of doing some reflection, your family and your family life, and maybe you were already maybe working into the world of taking care of yourself at that time.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I get burning question. Did you ever have these moments when you like saw the lights or the tunnels of heaven or anything?
Oh, yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time with Travis. Travis was dead. And
Mhm.
for lack of a better way to put it, he would come and get me. And so I don't think that I was never dead, but I spent time with dead people.
Oh,
So he would come and get me, and I attend, like, there was a few times that we would go and meet up with our friends. I recall specifically being in the desert a few times where our friends were having like a desert party. And it wasn't until after I got home and I was like, oh, yeah, I remember that because you were sitting on the tailgate here and you were sitting on the toolbox and we were out and there was a fire, like a campfire and they were out there and they were like, how could you have known that? Because I was there.
really? Like
Yeah.
they were actually out there doing that and you were there?
Yep. Of
No
course, they
shit.
didn't know I was there and they didn't know
Yeah.
Travis was there, but we were there. And
No
yeah,
shit.
and I would, there were certain times that I imagine it was because things were really intense for me in my body. And he would come and get me. And there were places that I had never seen, like I'd never been to before. It was almost like a weird dorm, but there was a lot of kids there and they all knew him. And they knew that I was just a visitor and that I wasn't going to be, I wasn't staying. I wasn't I don't know if I just wasn't a part of that. I was still I still had an alive human body, but my
Wow.
spirit was able to leave.
Holy shit. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. Yeah, it is crazy. And, yeah, so for me, really firmly believe that there is another side and you are going, to be able to visit. It's different. It's different over there, and you have different abilities or capabilities. But yeah, yeah,
Wow.
you can
Huh.
travel back and forth.
And do you believe in God?
I don't have a specific God that I believe in. I believe that there's more than just this lifetime, but I wouldn't consider myself religious. And, but I do think, they say that spirituality is for people that have already, well, they say, oh, religion is for people that fear God, and spirituality is for people that have already been to hell. They,
Ah,
you know,
never heard
uh,
that one.
something to that effect. And so, yeah, I think that I have a unique perspective. I don't know that I've really met many people that share my perspective on life and death.
Yeah. And that's based on your worst day in your life.
Yeah. And, my experiences, like I have experienced near death and I have, experienced the other side as someone that's still alive.
Yeah. Huh. That's cool to me. That's super cool. It's fun to hear. So, all right. So now here you are today. You are a very successful mom. You have two beautiful daughters.
I do.
And what does life look like for you today? I mean, is there more to your story? Is there more to your story that you want to share before the book is published?
Um, Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's so much that is unique for me, but it's so much that's so normal, you know, relationships and children and running after them and taking them to their sports and their music and I mean, I think that's all pretty normal.
Hmm.
My friends and I mean, all of that stuff is just what I think most people deal with when they have teenage kids. So,
So, do people ask you questions? Do people go, "Hey, what happened to you?" or "What's going on?" or
no,
anything? Do
not
people?
very often. Once I think that actually people, will be more apt to ask who I'm with. Like they would ask my sister, or they would ask a friend, or they would ask someone that is with me before they'd ask me.
Oh, yeah. Because they're too embarrassed to ask you or didn't want to hurt your feelings or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, they're not sure exactly, But I think, if you are coming from a genuine place and you are approaching with curiosity and not judgment, I think you could ask anybody anything.
Yeah. And so you wouldn't be offended then if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, what happened?"
No, no.
And little kids, they don't ask you? That surprised me.
Usually they ask me like it'll be my hands. They'll say, because I worked in my kids' school a lot and I do art projects with them. And it
Mhm.
wasn't ever, like my face or my arms. It was always like, what happened to your thumb or something? And then I just tell them, well, I got burned years ago. And that's good enough for them. Most of the time they just move along and they're like, oh, okay. They're just curious.
Yeah.
I think that for me, it's always a little weirder when it's, like somebody in their 60s that comes up and is kind of judgmental, and
Mhm.
they don't necessarily ask questions. I got a lot of questions when the kids were little because people just think I'm old. They just look at me and think that I must be, 70 or something. I don't know.
Oh. Huh.
And so they were really, when they would ask about my grandkids when my girls were little, then I'd say, "Oh no, they're mine. They're my kids," and they would be just blown away, like that. It didn't occur to them that they had misread how old I was.
Oh, wow.
They thought that I must be like the oldest mother to ever have conceived in my whole in the history of man. So they would just assume that I was still the age they put me at. I just, had kids at 55 or
Huh.
60 or something, who knows.
That's interesting to me because you don't look old to me. I don't put that together. Huh.
Yeah, yeah, it happens a lot. Yeah,
Wow.
I don't
Okay.
feel old and I don't think that I look old, but I think that sometimes the scars to some people read as old wrinkles.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. I guess that could make sense. So you're on disability, right?
I am. Yep.
And I mean, one of the things that comes up from my perspective, from a breast cancer perspective, is that people are on disability and then like because they have stage 4 or something, and then they keep on getting reevaluated and stuff. Have you maintained your disability, and has it manifested because you're able to do your artwork or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, yes, I get reevaluated every few years.
Okay.
Yeah. And, but, nothing has changed for me. Like I can't, I'm still super heat intolerant. I don't have sweat glands or, you know, oil glands or pores, so I overheat really easily. And, my fingers aren't growing back. And I've noticed
Yeah.
that as I age, I think that any disability, it gets harder as you age. Things don't get easier for anybody, but specifically with a disability.
And you're still going through some surgeries, like you recently had a surgery, correct?
Yeah, I did. I had a spot on my foot that never really healed right. I ended up with sepsis a few years ago because of that spot. It's really hard to find a surgeon that, has any experience with, extensive scarring and stuff like that. And so I did find a surgeon in Denver. He was great and he did fix my foot about a year ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so now I asked this before too. What words of wisdom? I mean, I guess what's the biggest thing that you've learned from this whole experience? The worst day in your life. What's the best thing that you've learned from that?
That I guess we're stronger than we give ourselves credit for. I think that it is, I mean, I certainly have had days where I am down on life and I feel like, nobody understands and nobody has any idea what it's like to be me. But I think that could be said for any of us. And,
Mhm.
like take your minute, and then get back out there because you're stronger than you know.
Yeah, and you never stopped showing up for life. And did you continue to seek mental health treatment for something for that?
Yeah, I have. Yep. Yep, I have. I've gone through, I mean, your average everyday relationships and parents and childhood and all of that kind of counseling that, but I've also done some, intense grief therapy. I had survivor's guilt. I had, there was a lot of, and I have a definitive line in my life of a before and after. Before the accident, my life was this way. I looked this way. And I almost had like, a death of myself and my ego and who I was. And then, so I feel like I have two lifetimes. I have who I was before 16 and who I was after, because there was a huge shift in who I was after.
Mhm. Wow. It's pretty crazy. Pretty intense stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Anything
guess
else you
so. I
wanna.
mean, it's my story, so it seems normal to me, because that's what I lived. But yeah, I mean, and I think that that's why, like for years people would be like, "Oh, you should write a book," and I'm like, "Why do people? What? Nobody wants to hear about that. Why would somebody want to hear about that?" And then,
Yeah.
like doing public speaking or doing different things. I'm like, now at this point in my life, I'm like, you know what? Even, maybe somebody would get something from this. Maybe it is, people do like hearing about an inspiring story or somebody having the strength or somebody having the courage when you don't feel like you do. And so hearing somebody else's will and their strength, it is good. And I think that if somebody could get something positive from it, then I'll tell the story.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I love the saying that you said you wear your worst day around all the time. And that's a lot to deal with. And you do it, man, you do it with glory. You're an amazing individual and I'm so happy that you're my friend. So and I'm glad you're gonna tell your story. So when do we can we anticipate this book?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to get some help with it, but I imagine I can probably get that, like this time next year.
Cool.
That's my
Cool
goal.
deal.
I'm hoping for that.
All right. You got any funny jokes?
Well, if I'd have thought about it, then I might have had one, but I don't. Again, I'll follow up later with some
Knock knock.
banger.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
Nobel.
Nobel who?
Nobel, that's why I ring or why
Oh,
I
that's
knock.
why you
Oh, I
knock.
can't even tell a joke. I'm so bad at this.
I know I'm not good at jokes either. I'm like, oh wait, it had to be your dog. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I hear you.
I always fuck up the punchline. Like it never it doesn't matter. I always do it. Yep. All right. Well, thanks so much, Heather. For all of my guests out there, please make sure you follow me. There will be many more good stories to come, and we look forward to reading your book, Heather.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed talking with you today.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.